Well, good morning, friends. If we haven't met yet, my name's Kyle, and I am thrilled that you are here. We're talking about something that I think every human being wrestles with, longs for, struggles with, and that's this. How do we find significant soul satisfaction? When we're always longing and wanting the next thing, how do we find true satisfaction? And to get there, I want to start by confessing that I have a problem. And my problem is this: bourbon. Now, somebody like, whoa, Kyle, are you going to confess that you have a drinking problem in front of hundreds of people? No. I'm not going to confess that I have a drinking problem, but I will confess that I have a buying problem. Now, it's gotten so bad that my wife has said, you can have this cupboard, this shelf for it. Anything beyond that is just irrational. To which I said, so are you saying my current collection is rational? She said, no, but we're just not going to talk about that. And at some point, there was this thing like, I just want to buy the next one. And at one point, my wife was like, Kyle, I love you. Help me understand why you want the next one when you haven't drank any of the other ones. To which I said, well, why don't you explain to me why you have so many bottles of nail polish? To which she said, would you like to compare and contrast the price of my nail polish to the price of your bourbon? And I said, no, I don't want to have that conversation. And then my 9-year-old, who gets it from my wife, he's the rule follower of our two kids, picked up on it and said, Daddy, how come you keep buying another bottle of that whiskey stuff? It doesn't taste good or smell good. And I don't blame him. And I looked at him and said, well, buddy, how come, I said, you collect Pokemon? Yeah. How come you just want one more Pokemon? To which he said, the tagline of Pokemon is this: well, you gotta catch them all. And I said, that's the same thing with me. I gotta catch them all. I gotta try them all. I gotta taste them all. And some of you are like, Kyle, this doesn't make sense. I know, but just stick with me for a second. You see, one of my friends knew about this irrational love of just trying to try the next one. And so he's like, Kyle, I have a friend who has a speakeasy at his house. He has an extensive collection, and you can go and do a tasting at his house. So I went to this private invite-only party. There's over 20 people there, and in there, I start to meet people. We're gathered here around the most amazing charcuterie you've ever seen. And in this place, I kid you not, the collection of spirits there easily is worth over $20,000. Whether or not it should be or not, we can debate, but just stick with me here. And I'm meeting all these people. Oh, how'd you know? How'd you get invited? All these different things. And people started telling me stories about their love of whiskey and bourbon. One said, I went to Ireland, or I went to Scotland to get the best scotch. Others, I've gone and done the bourbon trail, and I've actually bought entire barrels of it. To which I'm like, how do you get that in your carry-on? Okay, and then in this place, and all of it, but the place at which everyone's story had its emotional climax was this: they all had the one elusive bottle that they couldn't find. It didn't matter that they had amazing stuff in their collection. It didn't imagine that they were literally sitting in front of one of the most amazing collections ever, and they could sample or taste anything there. They could not be satisfied until they found that one elusive bottle that they've spent years searching for. They're even more crazy than I am. And I say that to say this: for you, it may not be Pokemon, it may not be nail polish, and I hope it's not bourbon. That is not a good habit. I am not proud. I do not encourage that. But I do think we all have that same thing, that no matter how much we have, we believe it's going to be one more thing that then brings us satisfaction. I think for some of us, it looks like this in relationship. I'm going to be satisfied when I go from single to being in a relationship. From that to married. Then when I have kids. And then at that point, I'm going to be satisfied when I become the perfect parent, or my kids become the perfect thing, or I'm going to be satisfied when my in-laws stop doing that thing that drives me nuts. And it's a relational thing that says, just one more thing and I'll be satisfied. If it's not relationships, it's for many of us, it's some sort of success or performance. Maybe it's the promotion at work. Maybe it's the higher income, or maybe it's not anything like that. Maybe for us, it's the success of looking the way we want to look in the mirror. You know what I mean? Once I lose those last 5 pounds and I can fit into that old shirt, pants, or whatever it may be, or I'm ready for those pictures, then my life will be good once I achieve and accomplish that. For some of us, it's not that. It's not something we do. It's something out there. Once the school systems do this, or once the politicians do this, or once my church does this, and in this moment, what you do is you find yourself thinking that there's something that can bring you satisfaction, but I want to warn you, many of you have gotten that thing and are still unsatisfied. Oh, I love you, and I just want to sit with this for a moment. Some of you have gotten that dream job. You have the perfect family, and your entire Instagram looks like you are perfect. You actually have that thing. You actually got to retire the way you wanted to. And the scary thing is, it felt good for a moment. And then you needed something else. You got the relationship, the hit, the high, the success. And then you're like, oh, it was good, but it wasn't quite good enough. So for those of you who are saying, if I just got that next thing, or maybe you did get that thing and you still haven't gotten it, what I want to tell you here is that Jesus knows what the good life truly is. You see, that's our series right now. It's called The Good Life ? And what it's saying is this, is that humans are really bad at predicting what will make us happy. And at the same time, Jesus has these crazy ideas of what brings true happiness, blessedness, a good life. And in that we get there again. Of what is it that can satiate our souls? And the answer might surprise you. So if you have your Bibles, go to Matthew chapter 5, and we're going to sit with this human thing, this human struggle. It's interesting, I call it a human struggle because I think almost everybody experiences it in one way or another. And my theory is this. I get that not every single one of you believe in God, and for those of you who don't, you don't believe in Jesus, but you're open-minded. So here's just my idea, take it or leave it. My thought as to why we all have it is this. We've all been created by an infinite God and meant to be in relationship with him. And every time we trade the infinite God for finite happiness, it never quite scratches the itch. Every time we think there's something else, it's just not big enough to fill the hole in your heart that only Jesus, his power, his people, and his purposes can fill. So, knowing that you are not the only one, knowing that we all have this is what Jesus says. This is his solution. It sounds simple, easy to say, hard to do, but let's start with saying it. Matthew 5, verse 6 says this, blessed. In past week, we said that gets translated as happy or favor or the good life. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. This word filled is really interesting. I learned a ton about it this week. This word filled also gets translated as satisfied, but I found out that 15 times the same Greek word that gets translated as filled or satisfied means like gorged, like you've eaten too much. Like if you don't know what I'm talking about, it's the time you went to the buffet and you had to arch the back. Oh, I gotta make more space. And then you gotta like undo the belt just a little bit. And then you're looking around, making sure there's no one around. And then you gotta like undo that top button right there, like, oh. The feeling right before that feeling, right before the, pain, and you're like, oh, awesome. That is the word that Jesus is saying. It's not just that you have all that you need, but it's in that meal. It didn't just fill your belly, but it touched the palate with all the flavors that you needed. It was that perfectly prefixed menu where it walked you through all the flavors, and dessert at the end went, oh, it's all I need. It's that meal that has all the nutrition that you need for your body to thrive. Like, oh, this is so good, and anything more or different would ruin the whole thing. That is the satisfaction that Jesus offers. Towards somebody like, that sounds awesome. How do I get there? Look at what Jesus says. How do you find it? He says, blessed are those who what? Hunger and thirst for righteousness. It's interesting, this term hunger and thirst. Hunger is a sign of health. When a baby is born, it's a healthy baby based on a number of factors, but one of the signs of baby health is, are they hungry? Do they want to eat? I was a baby who did not have that hunger that I should have had. It was diagnosed as failure to thrive, and they say that lack of desire for food is a sign of a lack of health. When you leave hospital after a surgery, after a gut issue, one of the things the doctors want to know is, do they want to eat? Elderly folks, 2 signs of health. Number 1 is, can you get in and out of a chair by yourself? And second is, do you have an appetite? So I say that to say this, if it is in our physical world a diagnosis of health, what if in our spiritual life it's another diagnosis of health? What if the true sign of spiritual maturity is not being satisfied, but it's being hungry for more? You see, friends, I believe that many of you here are here because you want something else. Don't get me wrong. Some of you are dragged here by loved ones or by shame or guilt or whatever it is. We're so glad you're here. But I think many of you in this room say, my life isn't quite satisfied and I want something more, better, or different. And maybe you're here and you don't even believe in Jesus, and this idea of letting Jesus satisfy you seems like stretching and crazy, and maybe that's you, but maybe you're at another side of the spectrum where you're like, I've been following Jesus for longer than this young punk kid on the stage has been alive. And maybe for you, I'd say, maybe for those of you who consider yourself mature in the faith, the thing that best describes or diagnoses your relationship with God is your hunger for more. And I say this to say this, those of you who consider yourself mature Christians, been there a while, let me tell you, the moment you stop hungering for more is the moment where you move into complacency, and it's a sign that your relationship with Jesus is not as strong as it used to be. Amen. So, satisfied is the promise. Hunger and thirst is part of how we get there, but hunger and thirst for what? It says hunger and thirst for righteousness. What is righteousness? I feel like it's one of those words that we say, but we don't really know, or we have a shallow, trite, almost cliche understanding of it. What I'm concerned of is just using the word righteousness, is that most of us have a picture of it, but it's only part of it. What I want to explain this morning is that this word righteousness, when Jesus uses it, there's a 3-dimensional component. And I'm concerned that many of us only understand one of the dimensions of righteousness or right living or being right or rightness in the world, whatever that may be. And I'm afraid we only have one of the 3. And Jesus gives us this 3-dimensional understanding. And let me explain it this way. The 3 dimensions of righteousness that God is talking about, that all 3 that we have to desire in order to be satisfied, are these. Number 1, right relationship with God, right relationship with others, and right relationship with the world. God, others, and the world. What do I mean by this? Well, let's begin with right relationship with God. What does that look like? A few verses after this, in verse 20 of Matthew 5, he's going to use this word righteousness again. It'll be the second time. Whenever it's repeated, you want to bring these 2 ideas together. And what Jesus says is this. It's very interesting. He says to the people, he says, unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and Sadducees, you will not enter the kingdom of God. To which everyone's like, whoa, how can I be more righteous than those? The priest, the perfect one. The word Pharisee literally means set apart, because they're the best at following the rules, and they're so good at following the rules, they made extra rules and they followed those rules. They are the best at this. How could I be more righteous with God than those who are known and defined by right behaviors? 2 reasons. 1, the righteousness of the Pharisees and the Sadducees was, 1, it was an external righteousness instead of an internal righteousness of the heart. But the second is this. Their righteousness was a self-righteousness. And they believed what made them right, what made them good, and what would satisfy them is their own behaviors, made them right with God, with others, and themselves. And some of you are like, oh, self-righteousness. Oh, I see it in the church all the time. Hey, when we see self-righteousness in the church around here, we sniff it out, cut it out. But let me be clear, it is not a uniquely Christian thing to have self-righteousness. People in every walk of life have some sort of self-righteousness. What? You walk into a room and you feel good about yourself. Why? Because of how good you are at your job. because of how good you are as a parent, because of how good you are at Halo. I don't know what your thing is, but everybody's got this thing that says, man, this is what defines me and makes me good at what I am. And I want to tell you, every single one of us have the temptation to define ourselves, our rightness based on our own ability. And Jesus at the very beginning says, right relationship with God is not based on what you did right for yourself, but based on this, is that the God of the universe lived the life that you and I should have lived, died the death that you and I should have died, and because of his righteousness on the cross, because he died on the cross, he can now make us righteous. Why? Because of what we did? No. Because we received the gift of his righteousness that he gives us. It's not self-righteousness. It's righteousness that comes as a gift from God, which is hard for those of us who are achievers. So the first righteousness is righteousness with God that doesn't come from self-righteousness, but comes from the gift of God. But there's a second piece. There's righteousness or rightness with others. Some of you may say, well, what is rightness with others? Let me explain. If you don't want someone to do it to you, don't do it to them. Mind-blowing, unbelievable. I know everyone's tweeting that one. Oh my gosh, you'll never hear what my pastor said. It's like this, man, that rule, that's golden. Have you got it? Okay. Now, some of you know this either intuitively or because God's told you or because you were raised in the world that you just know that when you lie to someone, it breaks trust with them. You know that when you gossip with someone, it feels so good for a moment, and that person with whom you gossip, we feel like best friends because we're talking bad about someone else, but both of you walk out of that room being like, I hope they don't talk about me like that when I'm not in the room. All of you are in these relationships where like, someone here needs to apologize, and I'm pretty sure it's them. And in a world in which right relationships is not just based on doing the right thing, oh, that helps. But right relationships also means going to someone and saying, man, I messed up, I'm sorry, will you forgive me? But it also means this, we'll talk about this in weeks to come. It also means saying, hey, what you did was wrong, it was not right, and I will choose to forgive you anyway. Because the only way our relationship can be made right is not only through right action, but we get to right relationship through forgiveness and working through those things to bring things together again. Conflict avoidance doesn't do it. Being perfect doesn't. Being people-pleasing does not do it. But learning how to live in right relationship with others. Last piece on this, and then we'll move on. The most famous list of rules or code of conduct in all of the Western world is the 10 Commandments. And in the 10 Commandments, it's interesting, there's 10 of them, but 4 of them have to do with how we love and treat God, and 6 of them have to do with how we love and treat other people. To which somebody said, well, does that mean God is more interested in our relationship with people than our relationship with God? Is that more valuable? No, I don't think so. I just think it's because we're really bad at loving other people. And the reason I know that is because I'm married and my wife tells me. And then I'm like, whoa, what do you want me to do? What's wrong? And then she tells me and I'm like, oh yeah, I shouldn't have done that, huh? Or I should have done that. And in this place, the reason I think there's 6 out of 10 is because sometimes we are so dense, we just can't see it. Let me say it this way. When all we can see is ourself, we struggle to see others and how to love and serve them. When all we see is our insecurity, we don't know how to love someone else. When all we can see is our self-righteousness, we can't see the great things that person's done. When all we can see is all the reasons you should win the fight, you don't get to look and see the other person. And in that moment, it's that type of self-righteousness or that inability to know how to love and serve someone that takes our right relationships and makes them wrong. And what Jesus says is, if I died on the cross to fix the relationship between God and humanity, I also died on the cross to fix the relationship between you and the people around you with whom the relationship is not right. And God wants it to be right, and I know you do too. And through his power, he wants to teach you how to make those relationships right, and he wants you to long for it. Amen. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for right relationship with God, for right relationship with others. But here's this third piece, and I'm gonna take a moment, I gotta emphasize this. This other piece is right relationship with the world. You see, friends, sometimes I believe those of us who call ourselves Christians, follower of Jesus, we come here and sing about right relationship with God. We go into our homes and our small groups, we have right relationship with others. But sometimes what I think is sometimes we leave it there and Jesus says, no, I want right relationship with the world. What do I mean by that? This word righteousness is also translated in other places as justice. Justice is what happens is when right or made wrong. Or in other words, when those who are poor and oppressed have right judgment over them and they're given the power that they don't have. And there's this moment in which we see when we see the wrongs in the world made right by Jesus and by his people. Somebody like, Kyle, where are you going with this? Let me tell you what this looks like. It looks what happens when you drive down the road and you see a homeless person. Instead of saying, what is wrong with them? Oh my gosh, there's my property value. Keep my kids away. Instead of seeing that, you see them as God sees them and you say, oh my gosh, that's a beloved child of God. That breaks the heart of God and it breaks mine too. It's what happens when we look around and we see marriages struggling instead of saying, oh, I told them not to do that. But when we see other people and we say, man, how can we come along and love and serve you? It's what happens when we see kids in our neighborhoods who are struggling. And friends, this is why I've got to stop on this moment, because I want your heart to hunger and thirst for righteousness the way mine does. And I'm not going to say it all right. I'm not going to say it all perfect. So just let me share my heart, even though I'm not going to say it perfectly. When I look around and see the way that mental health is, I'm going to choose this word, literally killing our kids in our neighborhoods, I hope your heart breaks and it gets angry. When I hear stories of kids thinking they're taking one drug, it's laced with something else, and their life is over, I hope you not only have your heart break for them and for that family, but I also hope that you get so angry that the devil is coming and picking on our kids with lies. He's coming to steal, kill, and destroy. I hope you get so angry that you say, I got to do something about that. I'm not going to sit back and say, I told you so. I'm not going to sit back and say, well, that's because of the schools. I'm not going to sit back and say, well, that's because of this, or that's because of that. What I hope you do is first hurt for it and then get angry about it and then say, we're going to be a church that does something about it. Amen. And let me say it this way. I've been trying to figure out how to say this the right way for over a year, because I don't want to oversimplify things or anything like that. But this week on Wednesday, when I was at a conference, Chamber of Commerce conference there, and in the middle of our conversation, everyone's talking, and then this bomb gets dropped in the middle from one of my friends there. He says, man, at our school we found out that late last night, a 6th grader took their own life. And my heart sinks. My mind is spinning. What do I do? Why is this? Is this a mental health crisis? Is this a process, not hope? Is there something wrong in the family? Like all these things. And to be honest, I really, really do not want to try and oversimplify things. I will never be the pastor who puts Band-Aids on big wounds. I will never do that. I will never oversimplify it. But what I want is this. I want when we see this, when we say, oh my gosh, that our kids and our people are living in such great darkness. There's no light of hope in their world. I hope we say, oh my gosh, it is not okay just for us to proclaim hope and light in this room or in our small groups. I hope we're a church that says, I hunger and thirst for righteousness, so the life, the love, and the light of Jesus shines so brightly in our communities that those who are getting their butt kicked by the devil, it has it all turned upside down, and we say, no, we're going to do some devil butt kicking around here, and we're not going to sit back and be passive, but we're going to do something about it. And let me be clear, friends. If all we do is righteousness for the world, that becomes a Messiah complex, and we think that we're the saviors because we haven't started with righteousness with God. And if all we do is righteousness with our own people, all that is suburban insulation where we have our own little pod and bubble that makes us happy because people do the same things, our kids do school the same way, and all of those things. That does not honor Jesus either. But it's when we say, I believe that Jesus makes right things that we have made wrong and only he can do it. When we say he loves people so much that us being in right relationship with him is so important to him, and when we then have our eyes and our hearts open, that we have a hunger and thirst that says, the way it is right now is not the way it's supposed to be, and I'm going to do something about it. That is what hungering and thirsting for righteousness looks like. And friends, I hope you get a taste for it. Because when you taste it, it changes your palate. So friends, how? If it's true that all of us have this thing we believe that will satisfy us, but only the infinite God can satisfy our infinite desires, if that's true, and the thing that will actually satisfy us is longing for, is developing an appetite for righteousness with God, others, in the world, how do we change our appetites? Some of you are like, I'm on a diet right now, Kyle. How do I change my appetites? how would you learn, let me say it this way. How do we learn how to change our appetites? A number of years ago, there was a Native American shaman who was the spiritual leader and doctor for their tribe. This man had a conversion, life-changing experience with Jesus. And he actually believed that it was Jesus that was the true healer and life giver. And now wanted to share with his community the hope that he found in Jesus. But in this moment, he's like, I've lived one way my whole life, and now I'm trying to live a new way. And there's this struggle inside of me. I don't know what to do. And they said, well, what do you mean there's a struggle inside of me? And this man goes on to say, he says this. He says, in my heart, in my life, it feels like there is a dogfight. There are two wild wolves fighting inside of me. One that wants me to do it God's way, one that wants me to do it my way, and it's a nonstop battle. To which the person asked, so which dog wins? He paused, he thought for a second, and he said this. He said, whichever dog I feed the most becomes the strongest. So, with that framework, let me say this. How do you actually experience a change so that you actually hunger and thirst for righteousness, so it comes from your heart and overflows into everything else you do? Let me say it this way. Let me try and be as clear as possible. You have to starve something to satisfy something else. You have to starve something to satiate something else. Let me explain how this works. For years, I have had a practice that the first thing I do in the morning is grab my phone. Why? Because I want to know who won last night. I want to know what's going on the news so I can sound informed there. And I also just want to scroll through TikTok to get some dopamine things. And I also want to escape all the chaos that's in my mind, head, and heart. So I said, God, what if the first thing I reached for in the morning was not for my phone, but for you? And so in this past week, in preparation for this, my heart is, again, to fight hypocrisy at all things, to say, I'm never going to be a pastor who tells you what to do if I haven't or won't do it myself. So I said, I got to lead by example on this one. So this was my thing, starting in the middle of this week. I said this. I said, I am not going to open up and look at my phone until I've had 5 minutes of silence with Jesus. So what happened? I got up, I would reach for it, turn it off, go plug it in. And then I did this thing where I would go downstairs and help my wife with breakfast and help my kids get ready for bed. And my wife's like, whoa, it's a miracle. I didn't have to call you downstairs 3 times. And then there's this moment where, oh my gosh, I can then take my kids to school and have that moment with them where I get to hug them and kiss them at the end. And then at the end, instead of doing what I usually do and go to the bathroom for 20 minutes while I'm scrolling through all of it, there was this moment where I realized, oh, no. What if I stopped, and in that moment, I just had 5 minutes of silence with Jesus? Here's why. Here's why I did it this way. For me, devices are about instant gratification, escapism, versus taking this anxiety to always be doing, thinking, or saying, and stopping and say, for 5 minutes, I'm going to trust that you are working even when I'm not working, Jesus. That you are actually in my kids' life while they're at school when I can't be with them. That you're actually loving and leading our church in ways that I couldn't in this moment. And instead of thinking that my identity is based on what I do for God, do for others, or even do for myself, instead of that, what I do is starve the anxiety, I starve the escapism, I starve the need for dopamine in my brain, I starve that. What happens? And my love for Jesus grows. My ability to be present with my family grows, and something inside of me changes. And the first time you have it, like 5 minutes, that's forever. A few days later, you're like, oh, is that it? But these little things happen. Kyle, who's always anxious, always thinking, talking, solving, tinkering, in those moments of stress in the day where there's a little bit of conflict that comes up, in that moment, instead of having to hyper jump into it, there was a moment where I can just, the same peace that was there with me in the morning is here with me right now, and I have practiced it so I can access it in that moment. God, let your peace and patience and power rule so I don't have to try to be God and fix this situation. I starve anxiety. I starve the need to always solve. I starve this escapism that I have in me so that my love for Jesus, presence with people, and ability to trust God grows. And I don't know in you what needs to be starved. For some of you, the thing that needs to be starved is constant comparison. Well, I'm not like this person. For some of you, what needs to starve is this narrative that you tell yourself of once I get here, it'll happen. For some of you, it's not an internal thing, it's an external thing. Some of you, what you need to starve, friends, is the way that you engage in unhealthy relationships. Some of us have gotten so into people pleasing that we say yes to everything. And when we say no to someone, we feel like we are doing something wrong. What if for one day you were just able to say no and not apologize for it? What would happen if every time you said no out loud, in your head you said, I'm going to starve people-pleasing and codependence, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna feed the reality that I am not made to serve and please other human beings. I'm made to only serve and please Jesus, and he's the one that gives me ultimate satisfaction. And when I live trying to please human beings, I am in a place where I can never be satisfied because there will always be someone who's upset with me. What do you need to starve, friends? You see, this is what Christians have practiced for thousands of years. We've called it fasting. It's now become a diet fad, but fasting is this. It's saying no to one thing so you can say yes to another. It's most commonly done with food. Food says, hey, I'm not gonna trust food to fuel me and empower me. I'm actually gonna trust Jesus to do that and trust his power instead of mine. And instead of that time I would have spent eating, meal prepping, I'm gonna take that time and spend that praying and learning how to trust Jesus and his power over mine. And friends, for many of us, maybe it is a food fast, learning how to trust Jesus. Maybe yours, like mine, there's a digital fast. We realize, I do not have a healthy relationship with this device and I'm not better for it. For some of you, you need to starve the way you interact with other people. But let me tell you this, between services, one of our medical professionals came up to me and said, Kyle, the craziest thing happens. I do this all the time when I'm doing health coaching with folks. They say this, they say, man, the first week feels miserable. She said this, but after 30 days, your brain literally begins to be rewired for new desires. You see, friends, I don't know for you how long it's gonna take. I don't know if in one moment God's gonna do a supernatural change, or for you it's gonna be a long struggle of dependence on him. But what I wanna tell you is God doesn't just want to change your behaviors, he wants to change your appetites. He wants you to have an appetite for a loving relationship with him, an appetite to see peace and prosperity in your relationships, and an appetite to see his kingdom come, his will be done, and rule over a world that needs his peace, his righteousness, his hope, and his protection. That's what God wants you to long for. So will you starve and able to satiate? Some of you are here like, okay, I get it, what I'm doing doesn't satisfy me. I understand righteousness is about right relationship with God, others, and the world. I'm still not sure what I need to starve and other to satiate something else. I still don't know what desires need to be changed. I just trust God will reveal that to you. I think time will show you. I think the person in your car would probably have a great answer on the drive home if you're courageous enough to ask. But still some of you are saying, I just don't know if the sacrifice I give up is worth it. If that's you this morning, or like, I'm just not sure the sacrifice is worth it because my life is fine as it is. Let me finish the story that Jesus tells. Jesus starts with these 9 statements. Blessed are those who, 8 statements. Blessed are those who, blessed are those who. This is the good life. But at the end, he has this thing that we've usually disconnected, but when you see them connected to each other, this is the impact of those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. It's not only that they are completely and totally satisfied, it's this. This is the result of living the good life, of letting Jesus transform you from the inside out. Go down to verse 13 and read this in the context of these blessings, of the Beatitudes, of Jesus' statement of the good life. Verse 13 of Matthew 5. You are the salt of the earth. What? Hunger and thirst, building appetite This world's salt, there's so many ways in which it's used in the ancient world, but one of the things that happens is when your life is different, people get a taste of the goodness of God through you. Like, what is that? And salt makes them salivate and you want more because the taste, the flavor of it. It's not just for you, but it's for those around you to taste and see the goodness of God through your blessed life. But if a salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. Kyle Thomsen paraphrase, Life Community Church, when you are no longer a blessing to those outside of these walls that you've never met yet, we are no longer good for anything. When our church no longer is such a blessing to the world that if we shut down tomorrow, our community is like, oh man. When we are only a blessing to those we know and those in this room, we have lost our saltiness and we've lost our mission. But, 14, he says, no. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people put light under a lamp or put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others so that your good deeds, or what when we say, so that your righteousness, so that the world may see your righteousness and glorify your Father in heaven. There's this really interesting twist that happens at the end. I know we've been talking about this food and satiation metaphor, but then Jesus has this transition from salt and then from salt into light. And what is he saying here? What he's saying here is that in every moment that we choose to do it his way, the light not only comes into our heart, but flows through us into others. So with that, the opposite is true. Every time we try to do it our way instead of his way, instead of light coming into the world, darkness comes into the world, into our relationships, into our hearts. You see, friends, darkness happens, just begins with that little thing. It's just a white lie. It's just to make everything a little bit smoother because we don't want to have that. And in that moment, that white lie just dulls the light just a little bit. And then to cover up for that white lie, then you have the real lie that comes next to cover up what that thing was. And in that moment, we're just chasing the light away and inviting a little bit more darkness. And then after that, you get so frustrated about it, then you go and you gossip about it with your friends. Like, oh, can you believe that? Can you believe that person? And now the darkness is not just something that's out there in your lives. In gossip, what happens is the bitterness comes into your heart, and the darkness, the bitterness, the angry, the judgmentalness now lives inside of your heart. You're like, oh, the darkness isn't just out there, it's in here now. And then when you start realizing that there's darkness in here, what it does is it creates shame. And shame creates separation from God, separation from others, even separation from ourselves. Even in our own shame, what we don't want to do is look at the thing inside of our heart that we have done or not done, that we are so ashamed of that we'll do anything to cover it up. And so we'd rather put it away in the darkness. And in that moment, you say, do I want to deal with my sin and my shame, or do I just want to let it hide? And in that moment, so much of the light is gone. You don't know how to trust and follow Jesus because he's not there to light your way. And in that moment, it gets to the place of ultimate darkness in our hearts, and it's this. In that moment where we say, I choose to trust myself more than I trust Jesus. I hunger and search for my way more than I hunger and search for Jesus' way. That is where we live in darkness. But God in his grace says this. He says hundreds of years before Jesus, that for those living in darkness, there will come a great light. It'll be said that this light is Jesus, who is the light of the world, and he's come and he steps into our darkness to chase away darkness, to chase away shame, to change us And then what happens here is you see that light, and in that moment, it opens your eyes. And because it's been so dark, just a little bit of light becomes almost blinding, and you see it, and you see him, and you see the next step to take. And that little light gives you the faith just to take one more step towards Jesus.
Let the light in, let the light in.
And when you do that, the light and love of God permeates your heart and changes you. It changes you from being able to take those hurts, habits, and hangups, those things you did in secrecy. What you do is you bring them into the light and say, Jesus, these things are wrong and broken, and God, instead of running from them and avoiding them and hiding them, I want your light to shine on this and chase them away, God. Because I want to look at my heart and I want to see purity, love, righteousness. I want your way, not just to reign in the world, but to reign in me. So God, I confess I've done it wrong and I want to do it your way. So change me. But then you realize, oh my gosh, for me to hunger and thirst for righteousness, it's not just that God changes my heart with him. What it does is it changes my relationship with others. You realize that living in the light means I've got to go to some people and say, I'm sorry. I messed up. Will you forgive me? The light requires us to go into scary places and say, we've got to have a hard conversation if our relationship is going to move forward. And the conversation you couldn't have, you now have the confidence because his love lives in you and his light guides you into that. And in that moment, you have the trust to make a relationship right because Jesus did it with you and now wants to do it there. You see, friends, when the light goes on, you see differently. You see your neighbor differently. You see the world differently. You see those who are hungering and thirsting for something and are completely unsatisfied. And instead of blaming them, shaming them, casting judgment on them, we say, I want you to have what Jesus gave me. I want you to be satisfied the way Jesus has satisfied me. I want your life to be transformed the way it's been mine. And in that moment, Life Community Church, you are. Listen to what Jesus says about you in that moment. He says this about you, church. You are the light of the world. It cannot be hidden. When you so hunger and thirst for righteousness, it not only gets in you, but it moves through you. When you hunger and thirst for righteousness. So I pray that your hunger will grow and that your light will shine so that you will all worship our Father.